And we are live.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jake Ward. I'm the president of the Connected Commerce Council. I'll be your cruise director today as we move around and tap into some of the expertise and experience of policymakers, policy experts, and some small businesses in the Utah area that can help us pave a road through recovery during the pandemic. You're going to hear me over the next hour reference a bit of research that the Connected Commerce Council put out today. If you are looking for more information on the research, it's connectedcouncil.org. It's right there on our homepage. You can't miss it. There's some interesting findings in there that I think all small businesses, but particularly small businesses that have taken the time to join a Zoom call like this could find useful. So with that being said, without further ado, let me go ahead and get us started. We'll do introductions with our panelists and participants as we go through discussions, but in the interest of time, Senator, if you want to kick us off with some brief words, yeah, we'd welcome them.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And this is, thanks for putting this webinar together. This is really neat. And yeah, just to jump into it really quick, as all of you know, COVID-19 has permanently changed the fabric of the nation's economy, but particularly Utah's. Utah businesses have been adapting with social distancing guidelines. Do they have to wear masks? Do you not? How do you operate? How do you stay connected despite not being in the office? And technology has really been what's facilitated that and made it possible. You know, companies that were brick and mortar are moving online. Restaurants are using QR codes for menus, digital orders, and everyday businesses are using technologies like we are right now with Zoom to still communicate internally. The pandemic's brought hard times on people. Utah's economy, though, was uniquely positioned to fight the pandemic, and we've recovered and are still recovering better than most other states. We have the lowest unemployment in the nation right now. We've put in place numerous grant programs with the federal assistance programs for small business in particular and for business in particular to help them navigate or make it through this period. You know, but compared to other more famous innovation centers like the Bay Area, Boston, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, we're not as well known, but we do have an unparalleled lifestyle. We're still relatively close to major venture capital and angel networks, and we're fully capable of promoting, nurturing, and training talent. And we think will will lead to a more robust technology-driven growth. The average wage for Utah tech sector employees is almost double what other workers and other industries are earning. Utah's making large investments in infrastructure. We just built a brand new airport for $4.1 billion, and we're doing expansions to regional airports north and south of Salt Lake City. And we have one of the more regulatory and tax-friendly environments in the country. We're constantly looking for ways to make it easier for businesses to come to and thrive in Utah. While small business is driving Utah's digital economy, big tech absolutely is paving the way for economic support. For example, in 2019, Google alone helped facilitate $5.5 billion of economic activity for almost 19,000 Utah businesses, publishers, nonprofits, creators, and developers. And companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook all have offices in Utah and are providing high-paying jobs for Utahns and are developing our workforce. We want to continue to attract the brightest minds, develop our workforce, and harness the power of tech to boost our economy. We need to ensure that the regulatory environment is not overly burdensome so that tech can continue to flourish. And I'm grateful for webinars like this to help facilitate conversation and educate participants on how business and government can work together and support each other and move forward together. And grateful, for what you're doing, Jake. And with that, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Thank you, Senator. Not to belabor the point, but rather to put an exclamation point on the end of that sentence, the research that we released today broke down revenue by state, revenue loss. We saw an average reduction in revenue, obviously, across small businesses throughout the country. We surveyed 7,000 small businesses around the country with at least a representative sample in every state. Utah had the best revenue outcome of any state in the country as of our findings. Reduction of 5% revenue, which is bad, but when you compare it to an average of 16% and some of the other worst case scenarios throughout the country, Utah is absolutely positioned for a faster bounce back than really anybody else.
That's awesome. I'd love to, if you share that, I'd love to see it when after you've made it public here.
Absolutely. Robert, Lisa, why don't you go ahead and drop that link right in the chat, and everybody can have it right now. Thank you, guys. And I'd love to chat with you some more about some of those findings. Senator, there's some public-private partnership recommendations that we've made based on findings, many of which we just stole outright from your government, but we'll figure it out. No, it's good to have at least some lessons learned as we start to put together a playbook for small businesses around the country to build toward recovery. So with that in mind, why don't we dive right in and find out how a few of Utah's businesses have done it. Chad and Matt, why don't we take a second and introduce ourselves, and then we'll jump right into a discussion about it. Chad, you want to go first?
Yeah. So I'm Chad Champlin, the founder of Ruli. My wife and I started Ruli. It's a women's clothing brand when we were about almost 7 years ago when we were seniors at Utah State University. We started out as a brick and mortar store and then started growing on social media and realized that we've got to get online. And so, we built a website, and kind of the rest is history. That's where we saw the majority of our growth is online. We've been able to reach, all over the world by using social media and having a website. And so we're primarily a women's clothing brand, but we've been able to branch out into other accessories, a kids brand. We also have home decor and have just started selling furniture as well. So we're turning more into a lifestyle brand, but primarily it's women's clothing online.
Great. Thank you, Chad. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. My name is Matt Bowman. I'm the founder of MyTech High. I've been involved with online education since the mid-90s. So a couple of decades before COVID made online learning a thing that everyone knew about. So I've been involved with online education for a long time, and it's just really exciting to see how COVID has created a scenario where more and more people are realizing that online learning can be a successful experience if done well. So there's obviously great success stories, but there's also been some really big painful moments around the country with districts that haven't really figured out how to do that right. We serve kids from ages 5 to 18, all subjects. We also have college partners that we work with to help them enter this COVID online learning world. And that's been a really great experience to find innovative districts and innovative colleges that want to do online learning right. So that's really what we focus on. And of course, we use tech platform and customize software to make that happen well for students of all ages. So happy to be here.
You're welcome. Matt, actually, one of the findings that we came out with today as part of this research is that we can break down small businesses into 3 categories: drivers, adopters, and maintainers. Drivers are those small businesses like Ruli that have made the decision to fundamentally be digitally empowered, right? They're online marketplaces with e-commerce tools that use digital advertising to grow their business. Adopters are those small businesses that utilize a specific tool set to solve a specific problem, but aren't particularly anxious to adopt more tools and grow in a variety of ways. And maintainers are the leanest of the category. The tools are simple, they serve a very basic function, and they're not adding much to the baseline activity of the company. Of the of the drivers, we saw a minor reduction in revenue year on year. It's down about adopters, it's 24%, and for maintainers, it's 34%. These are all national averages. There's variance within states, obviously. What that tells us is the idea of a digital safety net is real, that if you are incorporating these tools and services into your business, it gives you the agility to move your business online. It gives you access to a larger customer base because you can leverage tools to get to a new market. And you can find inefficiencies in your brick and mortar or your workforce or other ways that you can tighten your belt a little bit in order to stay in business. I'll get to the question. The biggest obstacle was education. the single largest variable that determined whether or not a business was a maintainer or an adopter or a driver, and therefore more likely to succeed and sustain in a crisis, pandemic, was the comfort that a small business owner or operator had with digital tools, that education. You are an educator in many ways, professionally by trade, but also sort of in your zeitgeist. What is it that you can tell us about solving this problem and lowering the barrier for other small businesses to get more comfortable with tools and services? Do you have any ideas or thoughts about how we can make that easier, make the safety net bigger?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jake. I think that the initial answer I would just say is don't be afraid and just jump in and do it. If a small business owner can just give him or herself a little bit of boost of confidence to just say, you know what, we can figure this out. The tools are learnable, and if you feel like you really don't have that confidence, then hire a teenager to help do that for you. And particularly, that's where we focus on. We try to arm our students with technology and entrepreneurship skills that are really relevant. And there are a lot of kids out there that can help small businesses thrive in this environment. And so if you don't feel like you as a small business owner have the time or confidence to do it, there are lots of people out there, and don't be afraid of hiring 16, 17-year-olds to help you figure out how to manage your business online with Instagram or Zoom or whatever. And there, then on top of that, Google just a couple weeks ago announced basically don't go to college, go to our academy for, $49 a month or whatever. And here are the skills that you can gain to be data analysts or cybersecurity experts or, programmers, whatever. And it's really powerful. The tools are out there. The education tools are out there on the tools business needs to succeed. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of our recommendations to policymakers and to technology leaders, platforms like Google and Amazon and others, was to get together for this public-private partnership and try to lower that barrier to entry through education programs, whether they be online like Google's certification programs, or do it through accelerators and incubators at a state-based level where you can help, whether it be people in my generation or older, work their way through the tools that they might not have. I just missed the digital native cutoff by about a year. It's not my fault. But being able to adopt those skills in real time, that comfort level is what enables you to survive amid this. Everybody wants their business to run like Ruli.
Yeah, let me just one more thing. We partner with Snow College here in Utah, and they, as part of the CARES Act, there was about $9 million provided to Utah to do workforce training development. And these things are from sales training to QuickBooks online training, really practical things. And all of that tuition is waived, is covered by the CARES Act funding for anyone going to Snow College online or on site to do workforce development training on. They got approved probably 15 different programs that are available today for adult learners to go through online learning to get those workforce development training that they lacked. So
great. Chad, I sort of jokingly said that every business wants to have sort of the function and agility of a Ruli, but I meant it. It sounds like part of your evolution from founding 7 years ago to the place that you are today was realizing that the opportunity was through digital empowerment. It's getting online, doing e-commerce. I imagine a lot of digital advertising and marketplace growth through targeted ads. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like over the 7 years and what it's meant over the last 6 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So at first, a lot of our growth happened with Instagram and social media. And in the early stages of our company, a lot of that was organic. you know, the algorithms were a little less difficult. It was easier to get the word out and, you know, have your content seen. And then as we saw over the years, kind of the shift in pay to play, you know, you have to start paying for digital ads if you want to get your product out there. We understood that, hey, we need to make sure our product is being showcased to the right people, right? And so, you know, using digital ads, we were able to take the customer base that we have that exists, replicate it into a lookalike customer, and be able to target specific ads to them. And through that process, we were able to grow quite rapidly. And then also with, you know, with online shopping, there's some concerns about, you know, what if the product doesn't fit? How do I know? What's the return process like? And so that customer experience has been super important for us. And there's a lot of good ideas in creating a good customer experience, but if you had to do everything manually, it would be nearly impossible. So using third-party apps or other softwares that already exist, we've been able to offer, you know, free exchanges if a product doesn't fit and they want to change it for a different size. We also have a software that we work with called TrueFit that takes our customers' buying habits from multiple brands and the sizes that they wear on those brands, and it suggests what brand or what size they should buy from Ruli. And this helps lower the return rate. We also, during the pandemic, realized, you know, a lot of people can't go into stores. They can't try on products in the dressing room. So we've introduced a try now feature where you're able to get the product shipped to your house. You know, you can get it in multiple sizes. You can get more things than you want to buy. You can try them on and keep what you want, send it back, and then it only charges you for what you keep. So there's a lot of ways to be dynamic because, again, it is an ever-changing environment. And, you know, with that uncertainty, a lot of people want to be confident in what they're buying. So we're trying to, you know, give them tools that help them, you know, be confident in purchasing online and having it be a good experience for them.
You know, we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and even prior to the pandemic and kind of a reconsideration of everything that we know about how small businesses own and operate, I am never, I'll never get used to the resilience of the market, right? That those tools exist, that they are available, that people can evaluate what works for their business and apply it to their business model. I'll never get old to hear those success stories. And it fills me with a little bit of hope that is going to be fine, right? That this is an incredibly trying time for the country and for our economy and for our towns and our communities, but that as long as we as owners and operators can educate ourselves and invest our time and energy into solving problems, and that there is a concerted effort from the market to support our work, we're all going to be okay. I wonder, though, if there's advice that you could give to some of the people listening on the call, some of the participants, about how to evaluate those tools, how to think about what fits their need, and how to consider adjustments to their business model. You mentioned being dynamic. There's no question that that's true. You would be categorized as a digital driver. I don't think there's no doubt about that. And the agility that comes with that categorization is clear in your business model. How could I catch up if I wasn't fundamentally a digital driver yet? What decisions do I need to make? What criteria do I need to use to catch up?
Yeah, so for us, there's, you know, two categories where we recognize the biggest problems. And one is we try to ask our customers through social media and understand that feedback that we're getting. You know, where are the pressure points for them? What's making it frustrating for them to shop at Ruli? And then also our employees, like our team, they're on the ground level every day. They recognize like where the problems are in the company. And we allow them to have suggestions of like, hey, this is a big problem. How can we fix it? And then, you know, you just got to start looking around and start asking around. I would say, you know, don't be afraid to go to a business that you look up to or that you recognize that they're doing something well, and ask them what they're doing. You know, a lot of times they have an answer to the solution or the problem that you have, and they can be, you know, a great resource for you to, you know, how did it go for you? You know, I talk with a lot of small business owners that have shops like us, and you know, we can talk about what the problems are and how this company worked for you or how this software worked for them. and figure out which ones to move forward with.
That's great. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about how your business and the business you're preparing your students for has changed in the past 6 months? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, great question. So it was interesting that our program and our families in our program were fairly unimpacted in March with the close of schools, because ours were already doing a home-based education model. And I wanted to reference a question that was posted in the Q&A that relates to this is, how do students stay connected during this world? The one way that our families were impacted by the COVID shutdown in March wasn't around the educational access to curriculum and even broadband access. We pay for everyone's internet in our program on behalf of the district, but the access to community was shut down. So they were very used to going to field trips and meetups and community events and those kinds of things that were kind of their very common practice amongst homeschoolers, is to get together in groups at the zoo or the planetarium or whatever. And those things were all shut down. And so they had access to online curriculum and our teachers and mentors, but they really missed the opportunity to go out and connect with the community. So where we go from here, I think we need to continue to think about the value of community education resources for students who are doing remote learning, that we need to have a thriving community of great education out there, even outside of schools. So karate classes and, ski lessons and museum passes. And, we really need those environments open for the community to thrive around learning beyond the walls of a classroom or beyond the digital curriculum that they might be accessing. So anyway, I think we need to always be aware of how do we connect humans with humans beyond Zoom, and community education resources are a great way to do that. And our program embraces those as an essential part of learning.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Chad, I think we have a Q&A question for you as well. Can you see that in the top of the screen on the Q&A flag? I'm happy to read it to you.
Yeah.
The question for the group, for everybody, as mostly online business, what kinds of online tools do you use to promote Ruli? And were those at all impacted by the pandemic? Also, how would your business have handled the pandemic without those tools? So you touched on some of this prior, but I think this is specific to promotion. I think we're talking about audience.
Yeah, so social media is the primary avenue that we use to promote our business. And during the pandemic, it's most definitely been affected. One of the things that we've noticed is it's a lot more expensive to acquire a new customer right now during the pandemic. And so we've decided to allocate the majority of our marketing budget to going towards our existing customer base, helping them make a purchase and continue to stick with us. We're trying to, in an area right now where there's not a ton of growth, we really want to weather this storm and make sure that the existing customers that we have are still with us after this is over. And then we can start branching out again to try to grow the business. But I would say, the biggest tool is ads on Facebook and Instagram, and targeting them specifically to our existing customer base instead of trying to acquire new customers right now, where it's very expensive. And they're not buying, to be honest. The new customers, they're less likely to buy.
Are you also using sort of a CRM program where you can ship sales and inventory notices to your existing customer base?
Yeah, so we use, most of it's just in-house. We use restock notifications a lot of times, because right now we're not taking as big of risks in the amount of inventory that we're carrying. And so some things are selling out, quicker than they maybe would. And so we're definitely using that tool to notify our customers of, hey, this product that you were interested in is now available again. Instead of historically during high growth, we pushed the envelope and bought more than we probably should, hoping that we would grow and be able to sell that product. But now, as we're a little bit more conservative, we do use a tool like that helps, let them know when we bring it back.
Wonderful. Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for your thoughts and your expertise, and also for keeping us on time. That was pretty impressive. I'm grateful, as is everybody else. Now that we've talked a little bit about what small businesses are doing, how we're bridging the gap from today to tomorrow in terms of tools and services, let's talk a little bit about the way that public policy and governments, state and federal, are affecting the recovery. What's happening, what's going to happen, and where we go from here. So for that conversation, I'll bring in Alex Stack and Chris Koopman. Alex, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Chris will pop over to you for a second.
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Alex Stack. I'm the Director of Technology Policy at the Progressive Policy Institute here in Washington, D.C. My work primarily focuses on antitrust and digital privacy issues related to tech, but PPI as an organization broadly, we work on every policy area here. We're a center-left moderate think tank, and our slogan is that we're radically pragmatic, so we just want to improve governance for everyone. So.
Chris.
I'm Chris Koopman. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. We're an economic policy center housed in the Huntsman School of Business, focused on a number of areas, but bulk of our attention is on innovation and technology. So a lot of the economic and policy considerations around regulating the internet, digital free speech, rural broadband, and a lot of the challenges that we're talking about nationally in our policy conversations are many of the issues that we're focused on at our research center.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us, guys. It feels like a lot of the conversations we're having from an economic standpoint as it relates to the pandemic are focused on small businesses, right? Small businesses have been the hardest hit. They were the least, they were walking the tightrope the longest with the least amount of net to begin with. There is some evidence, as we said, that there is a digital safety net that has caught many of these small businesses. But I'd like to take a second to talk about the role of large businesses, particularly large American businesses, in supporting this ecosystem. Specifically, we've heard from both Chad and Matt, but also throughout our research, that tools like the G Suite and Amazon Marketplace, and Facebook and Instagram advertising, Salesforce CRM, Constant Contact, websites from WordPress and so on, provide critical tools, right, that they compete for small business customers, that they provide critical enterprise quality tools to small businesses at a very low cost. And yet I can't turn on the TV without hearing about an investigation of antitrust and threats of breaking up these large companies and how bad big tech is for American consumers and business. What's going on?
Yeah, so I think we can, I'll just jump in there and say, I think of this as two sides of the issue. So on one side, you have the production side. So how do these small businesses build, actually construct their business? And so I think of things like AWS, all the cloud computing companies, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Compute, all the biggest tech companies run cloud servers and hosting for small businesses so they can scale their businesses proportionally. So in the old days, they had to buy servers, host them on premise, kind of predict your demand 6 months or a year out in the future of how much actually usage you'll need for your servers. And it's a very costly, inefficient way to approach a software or internet business. But now customers can just sign up for a service with Amazon or Microsoft or Google. And as the demand for their product scales up, so do their costs. And so it's a much more efficient way to scale a company. And then on the demand side, when they're actually trying to find customers, targeted advertising on platforms like Facebook and Google and Amazon and others allow them to reach customers in a very targeted, efficient way. So before this, in the pre-internet era, the main advertising channels were radio, television, billboards, these really mass market things. So unless your product needed to reach, all 1 million people who live in DC and the surrounding areas, it wouldn't be efficient to advertise for your product. And so you're kind of locked out of the market in terms of reaching new customers. But now using targeted advertising, you can really target a few thousand soccer moms in a couple neighborhoods near where your business is, if that's something that makes sense for your business. And so businesses can really scale up in terms of producing things, as well as they can reach customer groups in a much more efficient way.
We refer to that as the small stack. That's right. The tools and services that every small business can put in place for not a lot of money that gives them the look and feel of a much larger company. And instead of having an IT manager, they manage a G Suite and an AWS account.
I like it.
Chris?
I think that to add what Alec is saying, I think most of the conversations you're seeing, there's a cognitive dissonance within the conversation itself. You cannot talk about big business without talking about small business, and you can't talk about small business without talking about big business. I mean, in very real terms, I mean, what Alec is saying is, like, Facebook is a $1 billion company fueled by, hundreds of thousands of very small companies. Facebook is an ads platform. That is how they make money. That is how they create value for shareholders. That is how they're available to offer the amazing technology they offer to all of us for free. Is because of the promoted posts and the paid ads that Facebook runs. And it's exactly, I think, why this conversation today that the Connected Council is hosting, that includes small businesses and policy people together having this conversation is so important. Is the conversation you're talking about, it's oftentimes political types and policy people having conversations very disconnected from the real world. You think of Chad's company, Ruli, trying to launch that company and scale it to the national impact that they have now 30 years ago would be nearly impossible at the speed and cost that they were able to do it. And I think much of that conversation needs to be regrounded in the entire idea of a digital safety net. That it isn't just these native companies like Ruli that are able to sell around the world and the technology we already heard about to provide like a seamless customer experience from their homes to buy dresses, but also the companies that have pivoted from being brick and mortar to online. And much of that wouldn't have been able to be achieved without these big tech companies. I mean, I know for a number of months, my wife and I were using Google to figure out which companies were doing delivery service in Northern Utah, right? Like, not every company was using Uber Eats or Grubhub, but they had their own delivery service. And it was where we were finding, on Google itself is where we were, in search is where we were finding the most up-to-date information about updated store hours, about contact information, about delivery. And it made our lives with, 4 kids, 5 and under, and 2 dogs under, in their puppy phase. It made our lives in the pandemic dramatically better by providing all types of information and services to us that, quite frankly, we wouldn't have had, but for a company like Google providing it to us for free.
That's right. I often analogize it to a bit of a Jenga stack. Right? The model and the method that companies like Google and Facebook and others have used to make to invest the R&D necessary to build enterprise quality tools that can support small businesses is all predicated on a certain price point. If you increase the cost of that R&D by making ads less targeted, thus more expensive, or the utility of data more complex, so not as value additive, then you're pulling bricks out of the Jenga stack. The result is going to be a higher price point for small businesses to utilize those tools, which at this moment are incredibly inexpensive. They provide scale, they provide security. But you guys are both privacy experts. The ability for small businesses to entrust their data utility and customer base inside much larger companies who are GDPR, CCPA compliant changes the outcome for small businesses by lowering their liability and decreasing concern and risk mitigation.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up prices, Jake, because my colleague, Michael Mandel, who's our chief economist here at PPI, he did a study recently on advertising prices in different markets over the last decade. And digital advertising prices have fallen by 40% in inflation-adjusted terms over the last decade. And prices for print advertising have actually gone up over time. And so this is actually the most cost-effective way for small businesses to reach consumers. And at the same time that digital advertising prices are falling, we're seeing antitrust investigations of those companies and not others, which is interesting. And then furthermore, you're also seeing a push right now, both at the state level and internationally, for digital ad taxes. So a very narrow product excise tax targeted on this, which is, in general, I think a bad idea. I support broad-based taxes. I think they're more efficient, lead to less evasion, and incidence is often better. But it's terrible timing in a pandemic when businesses are trying to recover demand and kind of start growing again. If you're going to tax their most efficient way of reaching consumers, and consumers ultimately bear that burden in the form of higher prices, just a terribly timed time to do that.
Well, it sounds to me, Alec, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but throw ball back over to Chris, is that we're not talking about a technology question. We're certainly not talking about a legal one. This isn't an antitrust case. It's an economic question. If you've invented something, if innovation has driven a product that creates asymmetric value and generates asymmetric wealth, then it becomes sort of a Willie Horton situation where you rob the banks because that's where the money is. That's why the tax is being focused on this very small sliver. What is that going to mean from an economic standpoint, Chris, for small businesses?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things to this, right? I think there's the increasing regulatory and fiscal attention on these companies, these large tech platforms. And again, I think these conversations are being had in the abstract without the downstream impact that they'll have on small businesses. You raise the cost on Google or Facebook or Apple or Amazon or Microsoft or any of these companies to do business, that doesn't mean that somehow small businesses will be getting a better deal. In fact, they'll probably be getting a worse deal because they're going to have to pass those costs on to either consumers or other customers in the form of these businesses, right? These small businesses are oftentimes the customers of Google or Facebook or Amazon. So any cost that's incurred by these companies, and we know this is just simple Econ 101, taxes are passed on to the consumer, and small businesses are the consumers. And so any tax in the form of a regulation or a direct tax will be passed on to these small businesses. So in a time, I mean, we're in a global economic crisis, and we're trying to figure out how to, quite frankly, bail out many of these small businesses and help them. I mean, we're having conversations in Washington right now about, $1 trillion economic stimulus packages to keep some of these businesses afloat. And yet at the same time, we're talking about how do we destroy and raise the cost for many of the lifelines and the safety nets that these same small businesses have relied on, right? Frankly, by simply reducing the regulatory threats on these large businesses, you're in fact providing an economic stimulus to these small businesses. Right? You are providing certainty for these businesses that the investments that someone like Chad is making in the G Suite isn't all of a sudden going to go away because, a state attorney general has decided that, offering all these products in one package to a small business is somehow anti-competitive or wrong. So now he has to cobble together the 5 or 6 or 10 or a dozen options that he was getting at one shop from 12 other shops. I think that really is the economic question here. And again, is one that's just disconnected from the actual analysis when you look at the interaction between small businesses and these large platforms.
And just to add one point there I agree with everything Chris just said. I think you don't even need to know Econ 101. You should look around the world. And so in Europe this year, so in the UK, France, other various European countries, they passed digital services taxes. And the mindset there, again, like you said, Jake, was rob the banks. That's where the money is. Like, these are rich companies. They're American companies.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. This is like, there should be an economic model called the Willy Southern Law. If you rob banks because that's where the money is, that's where governments are going to go to tax companies. That's where the money is.
Exactly. And there's an added benefit in Europe because companies aren't housed there, right? They're not headquartered there. And so it's not even taxing your own. They think they're not taxing their own taxpayers, their own residents. But these taxes were implemented earlier this year, and they've been going into effect gradually. And there were lots of headlines last week. So this is what I mean by you don't need to know Econ 101. You need to look around. There are major headlines in newspapers last week and the week before about how Amazon, Google, Facebook are passing on these costs to consumers, onto businesses, the user platforms, in the form of higher prices for merchants on Amazon, higher prices for advertisers on the big platforms. And then obviously those small businesses are not going to eat the cost either, and they're going to pass it on to consumers. And so politicians and regulators think that they're taxing the big companies, but actually they tax the little guys in the end.
So that's where we are. It's a problem, no question about that. Let's talk about what government can do and what they should do. You heard me mention earlier, one of our recommendations as part of this research was that there could be public-private partnerships aimed at lowering the barrier to entry for small businesses on an education level. SBA programs run through SBDC that helps to drive education, virtual and otherwise, for small businesses trying to adopt more tools, more efficient tools, solutions to problems they might not have even known that they had. What are your thoughts on that kind of investment, that kind of mobilization coming out of the pandemic, and what role the federal and state government should play, given that they're not having the best track record in the world hitting the target they're aiming for when it comes to tech? Silence. Yeah.
I'll jump on that. I'm happy to jump on it. So at PPI, what we talk about a lot is often innovation-friendly public policy. And so for me, that looks like is when you have government intervention, either in terms of subsidies or any kind of new training program, as a rational basis for doing so, we'd like to identify some kind of market failure or situation where we think like, why can the market handle this on its own? How can we supplement market processes? And so in this case, I think it's pretty clear when it comes to innovation or education, there are clear positive public spillovers that aren't captured by individuals or the businesses themselves. So there's a classic study by a Nobel-winning prize economist, William Nordhaus, that found that when an innovator or inventor invents a new product, they only capture 2% or less of those benefits of that product, and 98% plus is captured by society at large. Because it's hard to really control an idea and exclusively get all the profits from it. People copy each other. Consumers value products way more than they actually pay for them in many cases. So a lot of the benefits are really diffuse. And so that tells you if you want to maximize innovation and increase the incentives for people to invest in STEM education, to invest in R&D, capital expenditures, really there should be a tax code or government subsidies designed to encourage that kind of behavior. We don't believe in picking winners and losers necessarily. We should be broad-based programs that are available to anyone who wants to use them. But in general, these are kind of the policies that actually encourage innovation and account for what we see as a market failure that underinvests in these things because, of course, they can't capture all the benefits themselves.
Yeah, I think to add to what Alec is saying is small businesses require regulatory certainty. Any business requires regulatory certainty. You need to know that the investments that you're making will pay off over a certain amount of time. This is how businesses invest. This is how entrepreneurs go about doing their startups. And this is, every piece of this requires knowing that the goalposts aren't going to be moved on you. So I think going forward, as both federal and state policymakers focus on like how can they quote support small businesses by, in some ways currently the narrative is they're supporting small businesses by going after big business. I think that enough of our conversation now has tackled why that is a misconception. But I think going forward, when it comes to the current investigations, current policies being floated, this idea of like instituting a Glass-Steagall Act, which says that like Amazon as a platform cannot also offer its own products. I think a lot of these things are being floated again because they sound good on paper, or maybe among a bunch of folks who don't know business, they sound good. But one of the things you can do is just understand the economic consequences of what you're proposing, right? And oftentimes, what sounds good in the abstract does not work in practice at all. Like whiteboard economics does not equal real world economics. And you just have to understand that as you're thinking through these policy situations.
So Chris, let me follow up with that with one of the questions from the group. Do the companies under antitrust investigations deserve any of the antitrust scrutiny that they are getting, or is this simply a political crusade?
So I think much of the scrutiny being leveled at most of these companies is based on a misconception about what antitrust is about. Right. Quite frankly, you think, here's a perfect example of this is all of the antitrust arguments that were being levied at Tim Cook and Apple during the recent federal hearing around big tech and antitrust. And many of them had to do with decisions that Apple has made about who they let into their app store, how they police apps, how they go about policing the material and the purchases and the subscriptions and all of these things. Very little attention was paid to the impact that Apple's decisions are having on consumers. When your computer crashes, when my phone dies, when our apps don't work right, we don't blame the software we downloaded. We blame the hardware we bought. And this is Apple's hyper focus on consumers and their like extreme attention to consumer welfare. There's vast amounts of consumer welfare generated by the type of behavior that Apple is engaging in. That someone, you know, removing the consumer from the equation says, well, that's anti-competitive. No, it's pro-consumer. I think that the same thing with, you know, with many of the other product offerings that are, you know, being scrutinized by antitrust regulators. They're looking at them as, quote, harm to competitors. And that is not the focus of antitrust law. Antitrust law is harm to competition and harm to consumers. And if you cannot construct a solid theory around competition or consumers, you do not have an antitrust case. And yet we're seeing these things drag on 18, 19, 24 months because there isn't a solid case, and they're simply, you know, continuing to find, you know, harm to competitors as opposed to harm to competition or even harm to consumers. Consumers are overwhelmingly benefited by most of the things that these companies are being scrutinized for.
18 to 24 months, not coincidentally, is about how long it takes for an attorney general to run for governor.
Not a coincidence, yeah. And just to add to that, I think in general, I'm okay with scrutiny, especially of powerful companies or individuals, but I think the process needs to be fair. And if you look at the merits on the substance of the issues, these companies would pass muster under scrutiny. And so I think at the end of the day, I don't predict that any companies will actually be broken up because we have the rule of law and we have the court system. And the disappointing thing for me about this whole process is kind of the missed opportunity to look at other sectors of the economy that actually do have real competition concerns and I think are being under scrutinized. So you have things like the healthcare sector where hospitals, there's been massive consolidation in the hospital sector over time, multiple really top level economic studies showing that prices have increased, quality has not increased accordingly after these mergers have taken place. I wouldn't say our hospital sector was very resilient during the current pandemic. They did their best, and I applaud the workers themselves. But in terms of the businesses, they didn't have much excess capacity or ability to really scale up in the same way that the tech sector responded in a very resilient way during this crisis. And so you look at other things like the airlines industry, you look at food processors, again, massive consolidation. In general, in recent years, price increases, quality decreases, the kind of thing, again, back to Chris's point, how are consumers being affected by behavior in these industries? That's where I'd like to see there be hearings. I'd like to see pressure on the FTC and the DOJ to look into these sectors more. And again, maybe under a fair hearing, there won't be much needed change, but that's where I think there's more potential for actual real violations.
Well, listen, I don't want to get off on a tangent because we can do this all day, but this is what capitalism looks like. Consolidation ultimately leads to 3 to 5 dominant corporate structures that lead every marketplace. But I don't remember anybody blaming Ford because brake pad companies were going out of business. Now, that isn't competitive. That's the supply chain. That's what it is. Market forces create survival of the fittest, and those vertical integration from people that build the pieces that go into the larger platform. That's how consumers get the best product. Speaking of which, I got one more question from the audience for you. What would it look like if these, say Google, and Google's a harder one because it's integrated with Facebook or others, or even Amazon, were broken up? Would we even notice the difference? I know the answer to this question, but go ahead.
I'll give it a shot. I think in general, the way to think about I think tech is a very weird category for these companies because there actually is no like actual tech industry. Every business in the year 2020 uses technology. The business model of these companies are very different in terms of, Apple sells mostly physical products. Facebook is just a social networking company that sells internet platforms or services. And so they're very different companies. But in general, one thing they do share, I would say, is the idea of like an ecosystem. And so all the parts are kind of interdependent upon each other. And so if I'll just use Google as an example, but this applies relatively to most of these companies. If they try to break off Google search from like Google Documents or Gmail, right? Well, the reason Gmail and Google Docs are free to you as a consumer is because it's being subsidized by Google Search's business and the ads that are served there. And so those will probably no longer be free, and you can look forward to paying for those directly out of your pocket. And 2, the data that is shared between these things actually improves the services for each other. And as a logged in user, you only need to log in once, and then Google, has all your account credentials, knows what you've been doing with its other services, and uses that information to improve them, make it better for you, a more seamless, integrated experience. And so I think at the end of the day, one thing that consumers in the digital age value more than anything else is the user experience. And often a good user, not always, but often a good user experience comes from having an integrated experience where all the products and services kind of just work together in a seamless fashion that is like not really seen by the user. There's no friction involved in what you're doing. And so I think if you broke up these companies, you would see a lot more friction.
Yeah, and I think to add to the consumer experience, you think that Google is just to add on to what Alec is saying, Google is worth somewhere like north of $600 billion as a company, offering to most consumers, like the average user of Google, like you or me or anyone else on this call, all of these products for free, right? In exchange for ad targeting and information about our search habits and things like this. If you were to break those up, right? If you were to separate ad from search and say, you can continue to use Google search, but Google cannot subsidize your free searching with the ad market, they actually have to separate them. They're different businesses, and now you have to pay for your search. How much do you think a subscription to Google annually would cost to have like all of that technology at your fingertips? I don't know what it would cost, but I do know there have been recent studies that have gotten to a willingness to pay for Google users for basically, what would they pay for privacy? So to not have the ads tracking them based on search and their behaviors, $76 is what the average willingness to pay was. That comes out to like 21 cents a day, right? To use Google. I have to imagine a $600 billion company's, bread and butter product is going to cost more. I mean, $76 is not even like what an annual Netflix subscription is worth, right? Like, I think people are paying a lot more for a lot less in other areas, and yet when the question comes down to what are you willing to pay to have an ad-free Google, people say $76 is about what it comes down to. It's going to cost a lot more than that, and it's going to be painful for consumers when they have to incur the costs of the product that they're getting for free because these other products are being offered at a cost to businesses, small businesses, for example, for their paid ads on the other side.
Let's hope that day never comes, Chris. I'd hate to add any more uncertainty into this marketplace. The investigations alone are disruptive enough amid a global pandemic. I'd really hate to see any actual change come at a time when small businesses were at an all-time growth trajectory and are now building back with the tools that they need and the roadmap to full recovery. The entrepreneurial spirit and resilience that comes with being tested like this. I mean, we're going to see some pretty explosive growth on the other side of this thing. I think that is about all of our time for today. If you guys have any parting thoughts, anybody? Chad, Matt, Alec, Chris, anybody? Go ahead, Alec. You got something? No?
I'll just say that this will not be over soon. So if people are interested in this topic or want to pay attention to it, it's going to be coming for years, no matter who wins in November this year. So it's an important topic, and really let's not make unforced errors here on the public policy end. And so I think there are definitely room for improvement. But right now, I feel like my job is mostly playing defense in Washington and making sure that people don't do dumb things. And so I hope in Utah as well that it sounds like your leaders there are making much smarter decisions than our leaders in Washington. But I hope they continue to do that. And just to be important that, like, again, if policymakers and politicians think they're going to only harm big businesses with their misguided policies, actually it's going to be an indirect shot on small businesses and consumers. And so let's just not do that.
Yeah. And I think for the Utah policymakers on the call or those watching, Utah has been and remains a leader in innovation and tech policy, right? Among state capitals, you will not find better, more pro-innovation ideas than the ones coming out of Salt Lake. And Utah has an opportunity to continue to lead here. As the rest of the pack continues to go down a path that is not pro-small business, is not pro-innovation, is not pro-consumer, Utah has an opportunity to step up and provide an alternative path that will continue to attract businesses, continue to attract innovation, and continue to set up Utah as a leader in internet and tech sectors for years to come.
Well put. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Stay safe until we do this again. I'm sure we'll be having this conversation for months and months. Everybody check out the report on connectedcouncil.org when you get a second. I hope there's some useful information in there. And thank you to all of our panelists and PBI for hosting this event with us. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.